My name is Jason. Some of you may already know me, and some of you may not. My name is Jason Bomar. I work for a Gold partner, Cisco partner in the Los Angeles area, LA Networks. Today we're going to go over really an introduction to SD-WAN, so this isn't specific to any particular product per se. It kind of talks about, in general, what is driving SD-WAN. You know, is it something that's appropriate for your particular organization? If you have any questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat, and at the end, we're leaving time to be sure that we answer any questions that come up. So a little bit of background about who we are for those who may not already know. LA Networks was founded in 1997, so just over 20 years ago. A little bit of a differentiator for us, we were started and are managed and led by engineers. So one of the few VARs out there that the engineers outnumber all the other staff. We really started being known and recognized for our engineering expertise because of that. We tend to be very passionate about advanced technologies. That's why we're talking about things like SD-WAN or sometimes SDN or the latest security developments and so forth. And because of that strong technical expertise, we really feel that it's our people that kind of make the difference for us. We do have 5 core technologies or practices that we focus on: managed services, collaboration, data center, enterprise networking, and then security. Although we have dedicated teams for each core technology practice, we also have some folks that are architects like myself that might span multiple practices, right? So we tend to partner with not just Cisco, although that's definitely a large part of our business, but we tend to focus with anyone that we feel is an industry-leading manufacturer for infrastructure. As far as proven expertise, we are a Cisco Gold partner. We have advanced specializations in architectures in collaboration, data center, enterprise networking, and security. And we've had those basically since Cisco launched those programs. And then we also have an advanced technology authorization for Cisco ACI, which is their data center SDN product. I've done several ACI installs and have a YouTube series on ACI. If you're interested, you can pop that into the Q&A and we can get you information on any of those. And then we really have one pledge or commitment, and that is, we dedicate ourselves to delivering the project that we're working on. We feel the best way to get the next project is to deliver on the current project, and so we really focus on that. We try to take a long-term view of things, not a short-term, just sell a box and walk away. Those are some of the things that differentiate LA Networks if you're not familiar with us. Some of the key partners we do work with, like I said, we do a lot of Cisco work, but as you can tell, we work with a lot of other companies. A lot of them are security focused. We have a strong security managed services practice here. So if you have any questions, just let us know. With that, we'll hop right into the content specific to SD-WAN. A little bit of background on me. I've been doing networking for well over 20 years. And I actually started with doing WANs. So back in the day of frame relay, and I've been through ATM and MPLS and so forth. And so if you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said, well, I think that MPLS is really kind of the gold standard. And in some ways it still is. But I had my thinking kind of turned around because I had a number of accounts that were looking at SD-WAN and I wasn't really getting it. And they were kind of pointing out that, well, there's a lot of limitations in current WAN designs. 2 of the big ones are centered around bandwidth. One is insufficient bandwidth. When we talk about MPLS, a lot of times we buy undersized circuits, and that directly relates to because the circuits are very expensive in MPLS. You get a very high quality circuit when you're doing MPLS. It's a dedicated private circuit, but you get lower bandwidth at higher cost. And so that was one item that drove, I think, a lot of the SD-WAN adoption. Other ones were fragmented security, particularly as cloud starting catching on more and more a few years ago with whether it was an infrastructure as a service cloud or a software as a service cloud. The branches wanted internet everywhere so that they could get to their salesforce.com login. The security team said, well, we've got all our security tools in one place, so we need to kind of bring you back to that main place. So you ended up with a fragmented security approach. Limited app awareness, by that I really mean we've always been able to do things like QoS, but it's very cumbersome and difficult. Now, your mileage could vary on what you consider difficult, but I could tell you I run into lots of places that don't fully deploy or deploy any form of QoS simply because it's complicated. You've got to get onto the command line and know how your apps work and what the ports are and the IPs and so forth. So that's what I mean by app awareness. Cloud ready, when we talk about a traditional WAN, obviously the only cloud is the WAN cloud, right? If you want to bring in infrastructure as a service, usually you have to have some kind of a VPN up into that from one particular site. So it's not very cloud friendly from that perspective. And then operationally difficult. This is a big one. Today, if you need to make a change to a QoS policy or to a security policy or anything else, you have 50 WAN routers, for example, you create your script and you SSH to 50 different routers and implement it, and then save the config. That's assuming you don't have some other tool that is doing automation for you, but traditionally that's how we would do it, is at the command line. So operationally difficult, meaning we do box by box management, right? And so those are all limitations that we see surrounding the traditional WAN. On top of that, there's just forces both internal and external to us as network folks that also apply pressure to the traditional WAN. One would be the user community. And by user community, I really mean the consumers of our data, right? So that could be expanding branch offices if you're maybe in like a retail space or something like that. Or it could be a mobile workforce, work from home, or contingent workers. Or it could be non-human workers, things like IoT devices. And a lot of times people think IoT only applies to manufacturing, but think about your smart HVAC system these days, or your Bluetooth that's everywhere, and so forth. And all those make some form of demand on the network, and we have to adjust to that. Applications really dominate the landscape these days. That's been that way for a while, of course. Our ability to support them and provide an optimal experience to all of these consumers of data has become more and more critical. And I'm sure a lot of people on the webinar are pretty familiar with that. And then security. Of course, there's more threats than ever before. We have all these threats that come in, and you really have to do nothing but look at any headline on any given week, and there's something new, whether it's an Intel vulnerability or a Cisco vulnerability or Windows or Apple. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that those are growing really more at an exponential level. And what overlays all this is there's more demands. It used to be pretty easy 10 years ago to get a maintenance window and have some downtime to do some kind of intrusive maintenance, whether that was patching or moving things around or replacing gears or something. But these days, it's more and more difficult. The demand for us to shift things to the speed of business, meaning always up, always available, distributed applications and so forth, has really skyrocketed. And that last pillar kind of impacts all three of the others, right? I guess my takeaway message was you might as well make yourself at home, because we're going to be in this mentality, I think, for a while. This is the new business landscape when it comes to IT infrastructure. So real quick, what is SD-WAN? Let's just talk at a very high level. Well, SD-WAN is basically using software-defined networking type techniques to design a wide area network. That way you're optimizing and automating, as well as providing layered protection to all your different geographic locations, whether they're in the same city, different countries, wherever. When we talk about SDN style techniques, what are we really talking about? We're talking about some kind of abstracted controller, meaning instead of a control plane local to the box, we go to a cloud-based controller that acts as the abstracted control plane for my entire WAN. So my entire WAN, if you will, has a single control plane. And that makes my administration and operations a lot simpler. And so in SD-WAN, you would just go to your cloud controller, and that's where you would build out your tunnels or define your applications or set up your security policies and so forth, right? This becomes kind of the linchpin from which you manage and operate your WAN. And that's the big difference, at a very high level. We'll start to, as we go further, delve down into what those different planes mean. So a good question to ask is SD-WAN even really here? Is it real? Is it something we should think about, right? Well, Gartner thought so at the end of 2016 or 2015 in their 2016 report. They said by the end of 2019, they felt 30% of enterprises will have deployed some form of SD-WAN in their branches. That's up from only 1%. And from my experience, it's true as well. Most of my accounts are at least doing POCs, if not wholly embracing SD-WAN. What drives that? Well, the increased bandwidth with the reduced circuit cost is a lot of what does it. You might ask, how's that happening? And that's happening because we're going to leverage cheaper internet bandwidth, right? We can still have MPLS. SD-WAN doesn't mean you can't have MPLS, but we're going to augment our MPLS with some kind of low-cost internet bandwidth as well. It improves your application experience. Most of the best SD-WAN solutions will have some kind of application detection mechanism. If you're familiar with NBAR on Cisco devices, it's something similar to that, but not necessarily NBAR. So that makes it much simpler to detect and build a policy around an application, right? So instead of worrying about ports and IPs, now I'm worried about what's the intent I expect to provide, or what's my intent or my vision for a particular application that I'm going to provide to the consumers of that application. It simplifies management. When we have a single portal to manage the entire WAN, then obviously that's much simpler than going box by box. And then security, kind of how and where you need it. If you want to provide internet everywhere, if you want it at every single branch because you're a big, software as a service consumer, that's easy to do. If you want to continue to have kind of geographically choke points set up for your security, that's also easy to do. Most SD-WAN solutions are very flexible in that regard. So how does SD-WAN specifically address some of these problem areas? Well, when it comes to application performance, as I mentioned, most of them have some kind of app detection capabilities. This simplifies QS or QoE, if you prefer that term. But when the device that sees the WAN traffic can tell what the applications are, it greatly simplifies you being able to set a policy in motion that applies to those applications, right? It provides more bandwidth at lower cost. And again, whether that's a hybrid WAN, meaning I'm going to use MPLS and internet, or whether it's all internet, it works either direction. But no matter what, since you're leveraging some of that less expensive internet bandwidth, you do have the ability to provide more bandwidth at a lower cost and with greater redundancy. You're reducing the complexity. As I mentioned, we have a single control plane. It's abstracted up into a cloud environment. So now I go to one place for no-touch or low-touch deployments, for example, one place to manage or operate all my sites, and then security where you need it. By that, I mean, if you want to provide local branch security for getting to the internet, you can, right? I can push security policies straight down to the branch and have them leverage that local internet access. If I prefer not to do that, if I want to do some kind of service chaining, I can do that as well. So I have a lot of flexibility here. So when it comes down to SD-WAN, the most important thing you need to think about is, what do you want? This slide kind of talks through some of the different benefits that you might get from different SD-WAN providers. And some of these may be critical to you, and some of these may not be so critical to you, and some of them may be, well, that would be a nice to have, but it's not required. So when you're talking to the different SD-WAN providers, you're going to find that not all of these things will necessarily get supported by any one provider. Maybe there are some out there, but these are all items that you may want to consider. Under operational simplicity, it should provide low-touch or no-touch provisioning. By that, I mean, I prefer low-touch because someone still has to unbox something and cable something up. After that's done, it's pretty simple. You go into your portal and you deploy that new site. You don't need to have a local account with someone with a console cable logging into a device and trying to get the configuration, and then you SSH in and put in the final configuration. Instead, this is more done as a low-touch provisioning where almost anyone can plug this into a branch. I have had projects in SD-WAN where we just have maybe the local site admin, whoever that happens to be, or site contact, whoever that happens to be, move the cables over, and then we just administer it out of the cloud portal. You should have centralized monitoring and visibility. I believe just about any SD-WAN solution you have will probably have the centralized monitoring and visibility. But you need to take a look and evaluate whether or not you like the way that they're doing that. Make sure it's something that works for you and fills your needs. There can be a big difference between, say, small and mid-sized business versus enterprise. They may often be looking at very different capabilities as far as monitoring and visibility. Interoperates with legacy environments. If you have a very small WAN, just a couple of sites, you might be able to, flip the switch in a short window. But if you're a large enterprise, it's hard to negotiate maintenance windows or outages, or you have a very large WAN in the hundreds or thousands of sites. You need something that can connect to both your legacy WAN and your SD-WAN environments for an extended period of time. So, and we'll take a look towards the end with some migration strategies for those. Again, if you have a very small WAN, there's not much of you don't need to spend a lot of time worrying about the migration strategy. It's probably pretty simple to flip the switch on a few sites. But if you have a larger or more complex environment, we'll talk through some of the high-level steps for that later on. As far as WAN flexibility, any of the solutions should really be carrier agnostic. They shouldn't be tied necessarily to, you have to only use the following carrier or carriers. They should all be pretty much transport flexible, meaning it could be MPLS, it could be cable internet or DSL internet, or it could be LTE internet if you want to go on a mobile or something for a backup. It really shouldn't matter to your SD-WAN. Now, again, maybe not all of those are provided by every single solution out there, and maybe not everyone is important to you, but you find the ones that are most important to you and fixate on those and just make sure that the solutions you're evaluating can support those kinds of transports. And then intelligent link utilization. This is being able to, if I have 2 or 3 or however many WAN links, being sure that I can steer my traffic in an intelligent manner across those links. As far as cloud and application awareness, kind of related directly to that intelligent link utilization, is application-based traffic steering. If I have a hybrid WAN where one cloud's MPLS and one cloud is internet, for example, I might want to set up a policy that says my voice traffic will always go over the best cloud for voice experience, right? It should detect my voice app dynamically and be able to steer the traffic to the appropriate cloud. Now, most of the time, that's always going to be your MPLS cloud. But it'd be very nice if there was a problem on that MPLS cloud, if it just intelligently flowed to the other link and then flowed back as the problem is resolved, right? And you had one single portal to go and report on that or troubleshoot that or whatever you need to do. Infrastructure as a service and software as a service are basically cloud support. We're going to have a slide in a few minutes that talks a little bit about 2 different approaches to those 2 different types of clouds. So whether you're attaching to something like an AWS or an Azure, that's more of an infrastructure as a service cloud. Whether you're attaching to something like a Salesforce or a ServiceNow or an Office 365, that's more of a software as a service cloud, you should be able to have some support mechanism in whatever solution you pick that's appropriate to you, of course. And then analytics and reporting. Most enterprises, this is a big one for them, right? Can they easily go in there and run reports to kind of get to that mean time of innocence that all network engineers are searching for all the time? Other organizations, maybe not as critical. They don't worry about that today and they don't worry about it tomorrow. But if that's important to you, then that goes on your checklist when you're evaluating any vendors, right? And then lastly is secure and routed infrastructure. So centralized control. I believe most of the solutions out there should have centralized control. That being said, you might have a centralized control that's also quite hierarchical. Meraki, for example, has a good example of that, where you can have one centralized portal, but then put hierarchies within the portal for different sites or different locations, geographies, and so forth. Same thing with Viptela, which is now Cisco SD-WAN, and others as well, I'm sure. You should always have secure connectivity between sites, regardless of whether I'm going over my MPLS or my internet. All traffic leaving the branch should be encrypted, right? By branch, I mean really anywhere that an SD-WAN node happens to exist. So by a branch, I might mean your AWS service, or I might mean your on-prem data center or your headquarters. But all that connectivity should be secure out of the gate, regardless of whether it's going to the internet or staying internal. And then distributed forwarding, I should have be able to utilize multiple paths, have multiple forwarding planes if that's what I happen to need, particularly when we're looking at high bandwidth sites and so forth. Okay, this is just a very simple architecture. We'll go into a more detailed one, but most SD-WAN solutions have 4 planes. 3 of them tend to be very critical and common to all solutions, and that's the data plane, the control plane, and the management plane. The orchestration plane, a lot of solutions do have this. A lot of times it's a RESTful API, and that's what I really mean by orchestration. Some way to take programmatic advantage to automate certain features and functions. Some businesses really like that. Some businesses aren't really in that automated mode yet. So maybe the orchestration plane is critical to you and maybe it isn't. The rest of these, though, is very important. The management plane is the cloud portal that the end user of this solution is going to use. You're going to go into the management plane, and that's where you're going to see all your different sites, all your different nodes. So you're going to set up your policies, templates if you're in a templatized solution. The management plane talks down to the control plane. And the control plane is usually distributed across all your different clouds, and it will reach down in to the data plane to actually instantiate whatever intent you set up in the management plane. Now, if you are interested in doing something programmatic through an API or something like that, then usually the orchestration plane will tie directly into the management plane because that's, where your configuration is. This is high level. There could certainly be exceptions out there, but it gives you an idea of the flow. We'll go a little bit deeper dive on this now so you can kind of see what it might look like in a more typical network. This is set up as a hybrid WAN where I've got one MPLS cloud and one internet cloud. It really doesn't change if it's 2 internet clouds or 2 MPLS clouds or 2 internets and an LTE. This would all really be the same, but to simplify things, that's just what I picked. Your data plane, again, is the on-prem device to any of your locations. And notice that a location here might be a campus like your headquarters. It might be a branch. It might be an AWS cloud or VPC, if you're familiar with those. It could be an on-prem data center or a colo data center. It could be any place you would put your gear effectively. You'll notice what's not in the data plane is a software as a service. You wouldn't put your gear in Office 365. You would put your gear in Azure, for example, right? So those are treated a little bit differently, and we'll see that in a moment. And then all those on-prem devices are all secured. You can see that we're locked down right at the data plane, right? Nothing leaves the data plane and exits across the WAN that isn't encrypted. And then you'll come in when you want to start configuring or deploying or provisioning, you come into the management plane up there. You log into the management plane, which is just a cloud portal. The management plane is where you're going to find all your intent. That intent gets pushed down to the control plane, and the control plane instantiates your intent down onto all the data plane nodes that are impacted. So for example, if you have different policies for different parts of your WAN, privacy concerns, for example, are very different in Europe versus America. You could set up some kind of a hierarchy and say, well, I need this change to go out only to the European sites. Likewise, you could have a change that went global. You could say, well, I need to update my SNMP settings. And so that goes globally to all my sites, for example, and you might push it to all your sites. So you have a lot of flexibility here, right? And it makes the management and the operations of your WAN solution much simpler. Okay, I've mentioned cloud a few times, and so this is exactly what I've been talking about. On the left, we could take a look at infrastructure as a service. Again, when I'm talking about infrastructure as a service, I mean someone like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, GCP, I personally am most familiar with AWS, but effectively you can put, not on every SD-WAN solution, but on some of the better ones. I know Cisco SD-WAN supports this. You can actually put a virtual node up in your VPC, for example, in AWS, and then connect it as if it were any other site on your network. You would just go into your cloud portal at that point, into the management plane, configure the policies you want to set up for AWS connectivity. If you want everyone to have a tunnel directly there, everyone gets a tunnel directly there. If it's only meant to have tunnels to certain places, you would set it up like that. Integrating with an infrastructure style cloud is very simple and straightforward. However, software as a service is even more simple and straightforward. And this is really a big one, and this pushes a lot of SD-WAN adoption in my experience anyway. As we see more and more SaaS providers out there, Office 365, Salesforce, and ServiceNow are three of the biggest ones, of course. I'm sure some of the people on this call have used these products and have had to try to figure out how to support them. Office 365 is a great example. They really recommend that, especially for things like Skype calling, that everyone have direct internet access. It's much easier if we don't throw this in an encrypted tunnel and bring it back to a hub site or something like that. And that's very easy to do in SD-WAN. Basically, you just set up your secure session and it leaves the SD-WAN location at the data plane directly. Goes out to the sub part of the internet where your SaaS provider is and makes it secure connection over there, right? I'm not setting up tunnels or anything else. It treats it exactly as if it's left wherever your normal internet egress would be. The difference being is now I've pushed my security policy all the way down to the branch. So I can control, if you don't want that to happen for every single app, I could say, hey, the following apps, they get to go out to the cloud locally. Other apps still come back to my data center for some kind of deeper inspection or logging capabilities or forensics. So you have a lot of flexibility here, but it's a very simple and easy integration for software as a service. Again, that and the internet for increasing bandwidth and lowering costs are probably the two of the largest drivers I've seen personally. So maybe some other people have had other experiences. If so, we'd love to hear it in the chat. Some key considerations and questions you may want to be thinking about when you're evaluating any SD-WAN solution. And again, you'll need to go through here and scrub this for what's most critical to your particular company. LA Networks works with companies on this sort of stuff all the time. And we typically do something that's a little more custom to any particular customer. So if you'd like help with that, by all means, reach out. We're happy to provide some kind of help. But these are ones that a lot of times we see are in common across most companies. Things like, hey, what kind of topologies and segmentation technologies do you support, right? Can I have multiple networks out at the branch that behave in different ways? Can I still keep a hub and spoke if I want to, or something like that? The second you say, I don't want to do anything, of course, someone's going to come up with a reason why you have to do it. So you're really looking for flexibility to support the needs of your particular business. Infrastructure as a service and software as a service support and integration. This is another one that's just been very key in my experience. I see a lot of places that get much better performance, particularly off their SaaS providers. The infrastructure ones, that one's a little more mixed. There's a very nice and easy solution if you have a SD-WAN provider that supports it, but sometimes it's not as big a deal because people have very specific, maybe only development environments or something like that that are in their infrastructure cloud, so it's not as critical to them. But the software as a service type of clouds, those tend to see a nice performance boost. And when we talk about things like QoS or QoE, things like Office 365, all your best SD-WAN solutions are really going to be able to predict things like your Skype conversations and try to enhance and optimize those. Routing protocol support, this is a big one if you're going to do kind of an extended migration where you're going to have to maintain a couple of clouds. That's the scenario we're going to walk through in a minute. If you're doing kind of like the Band-Aid off fast, maybe this isn't as big a deal to you. Application awareness, this is partly what applications out of the box can you kind of detect? Can you automatically pick up my Cisco voice calls and give them the QoS policy and experience that my users really desire? And what do you do when you don't recognize something? What are my options for, say, I've got a custom app that you're never going to detect because I wrote it? How do I go ahead and make sure it still gets the intent that I want it to receive, right? So I think that's a big one for anyone. Service insertion, I see that more at enterprises than at small and medium-sized businesses. And even there, it's hit and miss. But this is the ability to have maybe, say, geographical choke points for things like internet services if you don't want to do internet everywhere at the branches. And then transport independence, most of the solutions I've looked at, which is probably about 4 or maybe 5, most of them have strong transport independence. However, if you have very specific needs or requirements in that area, just be upfront, make sure that gets stressed, right? Management and orchestration support. Orchestration, that one is really up to you as to whether or not you need it or want it, if it's something that's roadmapped or not. But management, you want to be sure you get a really good feel for what that management portal of the solution that you're looking at is like. Do you want something that's very simple and streamlined? Do you want something that's very powerful but takes a little bit more of a learning curve? Do you want something that's a little bit flexible? There's maybe 2 different, like a basic and an advanced interface. All those options are out there with different SD-WAN providers. So you have all those different options. How are you going to handle things like your key management between the endpoints since everything's now encrypted? You want to take a look at what their solution there is, okay? So let's talk a little bit about migration. This is all very high-level steps. I think I just have 4 of them in here. And this is geared a little more towards a company that's maybe large enough that they can't easily just move everyone to an SD-WAN right away or something like that. So an extended migration where I may have to operate 2 different WANs for some particular time. So what I call phase 0 is always just what's my existing state today, right? So I've got some sites, they're all connected up into some existing WAN cloud. That might be MPLS, that might be DMVPN across the internet WAN, it doesn't matter, but I have something that exists today. So your first thing is to take a couple of your central sites, usually like maybe headquarters and or a data center, and just bring those over and connect them onto your SD-WAN solution. It could actually be the same cloud technically, but it's easier if we break this into a couple of clouds just conceptually. But we just want to make sure that we can bring those up. We can test things like the low-touch deployment and get used to the management console and make sure we understand, how the keying works, how application awareness happens, and so forth. But this is a very critical step because this is where you get to get your hands a little bit wet introducing SD-WAN into your particular environment, right? Then usually what I see is a couple of smaller sites that are kind of easier to move. We bring those up on the SD-WAN cloud, right? So that might be we're doing a cut. That might be, hey, I have a very, very dynamic environment. I have one customer, for example, that brings sites up and takes them down all the time just due to the nature of their business. So a site might only be up on their WAN for anywhere from 60 to 180 days, and then it's gone again. And so when they have that kind of churn on their WAN, it's very nice for them because they can just bring those sites naturally up onto the SD-WAN cloud. And, usually ordering things like internet circuits is very fast. I don't have to try and order an MPLS circuit where the delivery time might match how long I needed the WAN site for in the first place, right? But anyway, you find something that's a little bit low-hanging fruit and you bring those up. But here's where having support of dynamic routing and things like that comes in play, because I've got these centralized devices, and I've drawn them as just a single router here, but it really is probably multiple boxes, and there might be a LAN or a data center network in between. But effectively, what I've done is I've set something up to where I may need to provide connectivity between these dispersed environments for an extended period of time, right? Because anything that's natively only on SD-WAN cannot talk to anything that's natively on your legacy WAN, except through those hub sites. That's why you always pick at least 2 of them, right? So they have some kind of redundancy. And then phase 3 is I start to move the bigger sites, the remainder of the sites kind of over until I finally get to a point where everything is now connected to the SD-WAN cloud. And the only thing that would be on the legacy cloud might be those 2 hub sites. And then, of course, my last step is then just retiring that cloud. Now, of course, the devil's in the details. This is just 4 high-level phases. You have to build out a whole project and figure out, responsibly, what the detailed steps are. But this at least gives you an idea of how you might do such a migration, right? And with that, I'm really done with the slides. Do we have any questions?
Hi, Jason. So we do have a couple questions that have come in.
Okay.
First question is this the same as DMVPN or IWAN?
Sure. So that's a good question. And the answer is it the same? No. But is it functionally similar? Yes, kind of, sort of. It is functionally similar to DMVPN in that, and IWAN in that I'm doing encryption across multiple clouds, right? The big difference here between those 2 products, or those 2 technologies, I guess I should say more, and SD-WAN is SD-WAN has a software overlay that makes things much simpler. If you've done DMVPN or IWAN, IWAN, for example, does support intelligent link utilization for PFR, but very few organizations deploy PFR because it can be kind of difficult to deploy and manage. So it's very similar in function, but it is different on the underlying plumbing. And then the big difference is the software overlay. That's a good question. Thank you. What was the next question?
So our next question we have coming in states, some people argue that Cisco hasn't captured the SD-WAN market because IWAN isn't really SD-WAN. It's a series of existing technologies that were brought together to try and make an SD-WAN competitor. How do you rebuke this statement?
I don't know if I would rebuke it as much as perhaps embrace it, but I would tell you what Cisco did is they did acquire, in case you aren't aware, they're 2 of the biggest SD-WAN providers are Viptela and VeloCloud. Cisco acquired Viptela last summer, and that closed at the end of summer 2017. And that is now Cisco SD-WAN. So when you hear Cisco talk about SD-WAN, they're usually talking about what was formerly Viptela. They also have an SD-WAN solution through Meraki, which works really well for either companies that have already largely embraced Meraki, so they can just leverage that portal that they're already very comfortable with. I wouldn't swap out a Meraki just for SD-WAN, for example, if you're already really comfortable and happy with it. But if you're looking for, when they talk about SD-WAN, they're probably talking about what used to formerly be called Viptela. The other one, VeloCloud, was acquired very recently by VMware. I don't think that's closed yet, but it's in process, I believe. IWAN was kind of a disparate set of technologies that kind of got put under a architecture, or some people who are more cynical would probably say a marketing term of IWAN. The big difference between IWAN and something like Cisco SD-WAN, or formerly Viptela, is again that software overlay. And I have seen and worked with those, with the Viptela portal, and you could go on YouTube, or if you'd like us to come in for a lunch and learn and give you some kind of a demo, we can do that. But you'll see it really has very little in common with the look and feel of IWAN. That's a great question.
Excellent. So we only do have a couple more. The next question that comes in says, what are the benefits of SD-WAN for a single cloud?
Yeah, I do get this one occasionally, and it's a good question. The benefits, if you've only got a single, well, first of all, if you've only got a single cloud, I'd say you want to relook your redundancy strategy probably, because you do have now a single point of failure. But assuming that that's just going to be a reality for a little bit, there's still a huge operational upside in that instead of going site by site manually configuring things, I go into a single portal and I have a more software-friendly interface for deploying my WAN, and I have a single operational portal for going in, doing any kind of troubleshooting, reporting, if I'm interested in analytics and so forth. So if you're on a single cloud provider, the operational benefits are mostly what you're going to get. Good question.
Excellent. So another question that's come in says, great positives. What are some of the negatives with SDN versus traditional networks?
SDN or SD-WAN? I'm going to guess that they meant SD-WAN probably. So some of the negatives of SD-WAN. Well, probably the biggest one is anytime you've got to pivot on a new type of technology, there's a bit of an air gap, to bring your knowledge base back up to speed. So, I've been deploying, maintaining, architecting, troubleshooting, et cetera, MPLS networks for probably 12 or 13 years. And so I've got a very deep skill set, and I've managed to train lots of different customers with that same skill set, and they're great at understanding the underlying protocols and methodologies. When you come into SD-WAN, we're doing an overlay network, and so a lot of that, the underneath plumbing gets abstracted from us, so we have to kind of pivot our thinking around not doing things at the command line. This is a challenge for me, not doing things at the command line and instead getting used to managing through a portal. I think that's a good change. I could have a whole hour-long talk probably on why I think that's a good change, but I think that's a good change in the networking arena. So, I would say the biggest challenge is kind of that air gap as we move from one kind of technical medium to another. I think SD-WAN in particular, that's an easier air gap to bridge. SDN, for example, is a bigger air gap to bridge because a lot of SDN, particularly in the data center, involves kind of collapsing silos and going kind of cross-silo in a lot of ways, kind of DevOps or Agile-ish. And so that's a bigger challenge, I would say. But in SD-WAN, there is an air gap that happens there between those two technologies, but I wouldn't say it's nearly as challenging as some of the other ones. Any other questions?
We have two more. The next one.
Sure, great.
The next one that comes in is, what is the most popular API/programming languages across all SD-WAN solutions for their orchestration piece?
I'll be honest, I probably don't know. A lot of the APIs for SD-WAN are RESTful APIs, so you're kind of in a HTTP type of experience, so Postman is a nice interface for that. Almost all of them support Python, which integrates very well with a RESTful API anyway. So I would say in the networking arena, the one I'm at least have the most experience with is probably Python or Postman in a RESTful sense. But there might be other ones I'm just not as up to speed on, but that would be my best guess.
And the final question we have coming in today will be, which is the better solution, Viptela or Meraki?
So that's a good question. And I would say, I know no one likes this, it depends. If you already, I kind of mentioned this before, but I didn't really make it a main point. If you're already a Meraki shop and you're very happy and comfortable with your Meraki technology, I would stick with Meraki SD-WAN. The reason being is I have one portal, it's doing my wireless, it's doing my security, it's doing my switching, and it's doing my SD-WAN. There's no reason to add a second portal to do a different SD-WAN solution. If you're looking for something that's, so the Meraki SD-WAN is very simple and easy to use and leverage. You can have it set up and going in virtually no time. But I would say I don't think, in my opinion, this is my opinion, it's not quite as flexible or powerful as, say, the Viptela interface. Like one of the things I really like about Viptela is support in AWS. I can deploy a vEdge router up in my VPC in AWS directly. So if you're not doing any SD-WAN today, I would probably start with the Viptela, or now called it Cisco SD-WAN. But there's no harm in taking a look and evaluating both. Like I said, you really want to take a look at what's kind of important to your particular business, and we can actually help with that if you'd like. Go ahead and reach out to me or anyone at LA Networks, and we'd be more than happy to kind of sit down and have a more in-depth discussion. Any other questions?
Fantastic. Those are all the questions we have time for today, however. Thank you so much, Jason, for your presentation, and thank you so much for everybody joining us today.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time. I understand that it took away some of your time for lunch, mine as well, but I really appreciate it, and thanks for attending.